Let's look at behavioral observations today. So, think about why we might be interested in behavioral observations rather than surveys. They take more time, so that's not it. But there are places where it appears that certainly we would want to validate our survey results. And if it turns out that we're getting exactly the same thing from our survey as our behavioral observation, then I would just do surveys, right? On the other hand, if there's a difference, and we're going to talk about a number of those today, and we talked about a number of those on the last video, then we should probably think about maybe doing behavioral observations instead. We might do surveys because they're quick and easy, right? So they're more cost effective. We can more easily get a broad range of respondents to our survey. But one of the questions is about the validity. Are our measures, are our surveys actually valid? So in terms of construct validity, when we're doing observational research, we are actually watching people or listening to people and gathering data from what they are doing rather than only what they're saying. So, for example, in Meal et al.'s research, they asked the participants to wear a microphone on their clothing and as a result, estimated the number of words per day spoken by both male and female participants. And one of the reasons to do this is that in general, people had always believed that women talk more than men. And the research in general says that men talk more than women. So here is one study where men are talking less, but this one slightly less, but here we're talking more, here we're talking more, here we're significantly talking more. And perhaps some of this difference is something about the conditions on which they're being observed. And perhaps as they are wearing the microphone longer, they're becoming more comfortable with doing so and being more honest. That's also a much smaller sample size. And so, one of the things that we would wonder is, perhaps these 11 people are not representative of the whole population. We can also ask questions about how families are in the evening. And, based on video recordings of both the parents and children, we can see significant differences in how people are responding. Children are much more likely than adults to say that they don't like this food. Adults are somewhat more likely to negotiate with their children, to ask about their health. Children are more likely to talk about good things. So, these are places where observations, both the Meal et al. Study and Campos et al., these are places where observations are useful and important and help us to readjust how we're seeing things. Now, sometimes one of the difficulties that behavioral observations have is that there may be some kind of observer bias when the observers see what they expect to see. So, to what degree does knowing something about a person influence you? And how might your observations of another culture be biased based on your beliefs about that culture? For we may have observer effects where participants confirm an observer's expectations. So, in some of the classic bright and dull research or dull rat research, the big difference seems to be in how the observer perceived things and responded, and maybe even encouraged the rats in different ways. Similarly, with Clever Hans, a rat or a mouse, excuse me, a horse that appeared to know how to perform simple arithmetic seemed to be being cued by its owner, even though its owner had not any expectation that he was cueing the horse. We can think about some ways to prevent observer bias and observer effects. So one of the things we might want to do is increase inter-rater reliability. So these are some data from my students, Tori Lynn and Abby, who observed different segments of this Taylor Swift video. And they were pretty consistent in how they thought about it or how they rated it. To me, some part of that required some getting together and thinking about what exactly do we mean in terms of aggression. So Taylor Swift does all sorts of different things in this video. How does she, how do we decide what is aggression and what isn't? We also, in this study or in this work, we're looking at what happened in each of a number of different segments of the video. Again, helped us to identify exactly what's going on. Now, one thing that we can do in order to prevent observer bias and decrease some of these kinds of problems is to use a mass design. So for example, in the Campos et al. Research, the families didn't know what the researchers were asking of them. In medical research, for example, often there's a double blinding of the research. So for example, both the researcher and the participant doesn't know whether they got the placebo or the drug. And because of that blinding, we're able to remove some of those observer effects. Here in the Campos research, we're looking at inter-rater reliability for emotional tone. So we're able to make sure that both researchers are coming up with about the same kind of conclusions about what's going on. So one of the things that may happen in the course of research is that there's some sort of reactivity. Often when we are observed initially recognize that we're being observed, we react somewhat differently, right? Think about what happens when someone points a camera at you. You may sort of step back and present yourself in a somewhat different way than you might otherwise do. So there are a number of different solutions to this. One is to engage in unobtrusive observations. So for example, this woman is hiding behind a one-way mirror. She can see them, the children and the teacher can't see her. Sometimes we just wait it out. So for example, if I were to ask you to write down everything that you were eating over the next week, the first day, maybe even the first 2 days, you'd be very careful about what you ate and what you wrote down. After that, maybe there's some leniency. The third is to actually measure, the behavior's results, what actually is happening in this, in this situation. Now, I think a good question is to ask, is it ethical to observe other people? And when? So, it's okay. Generally, we think it's okay for us to observe people in public situations. So, for example, if I'm sitting out on campus and watching people, if I go to the mall and watch people, those are public situations, and most people don't expect to have privacy there. On the other hand, if I put up a camera in the houses of all my students, that would probably be seen as unethical, and intrusive. Similarly, this study by Middlemist and et al. Were observing what happened when men were observed as they were urinating. Is this ethical in this kind of situation? And probably it's at least questionable. There are a number of different things that we can do as we are sampling. So this is the blank spaces video again. And if we are only focusing on this segment of the video, we might conclude that there are very small, that she's exhibiting very little aggression. And yet, if we observe this part of the video, we see a lot of aggression. And so part of what we want to be doing is making sure that we are choosing a number of different parts or across time so that we are able to be able to say that this is representative of her behavior and not just in this one unique spot. And again, that's something that we should be paying attention to. So on that, with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and your next video will be from chapter 7. Take care.